Tonight, we have 6 stories, from Shapeshifters to deep wood stories, home break-ins, and more. A huge thank you to the generous authors who have allowed me to share these stories with all of you. This video would not be possible without them. Please be sure to drop a like and comment if you enjoy. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I post new videos all the time, and I always aim to make these videos the best they can be. Enjoy, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. So, my mom had to spend a few days in the hospital. She came down with some weird symptoms last week. Fever, fatigue, bowel issues, etc. And because she has some long existing health issues already, she decided to go to the emergency room. It's a good thing she did, because while she tested negative for the coronavirus, she somehow had a strep-like bacteria in her bloodstream. So they admitted her to the hospital for a few days to give her an antibiotic, a blood transfusion to bring up her hemoglobin count, and perform a transesophageal echocardiogram to ensure the bacteria didn't stick to or affect her heart valves in any way. It didn't. I'm lucky to have a job that gives me a pretty flexible schedule and the ability to work remotely, so I decided to work from her hospital room every day while she was there. I'm her only child, and her sister and her parents live in another state, so I was happy to keep her company and run to the subway downstairs for her when the meal tray was less than appetizing. Every day, I arrived around 9 a.m. and would find a spot pretty close to the main lobby doors. I'd work from the half-comfy lounge chair they put in her room for me, and I'd stay until 5 or 6 p.m. Friday morning, however, I was not so lucky with the parking. I guess everyone and their grandmothers had scheduled appointments for Friday morning between 8:30 and 9 a.m. because every single parking space was full, and the valet was parking cars on the curb because they ran out of spots in the valet lot. I circled through the rows near the lobby half a dozen times, hoping I'd catch someone pulling out of their spot. Then, I tried around the back near the cafeteria. Finally, I drove to the far side of the hospital, knowing I'd have a hike to trek, but willing to do it if it meant I could finally just park my car. Even that side of the lot was full. Finally, I saw someone backing out of their spot in the small lot on the far side of the duck pond. I sped over and pulled in after her. I was relieved to find a spot, even if it meant I had to walk the furthest possible distance to get to the lobby of the tower she was in. The weather was nice though, so I decided to walk the sidewalk around the pond and along the building to the lobby to enjoy as much of the crisp air and sunshine as I could before being inside the stuffy hospital room all day. By the time I settled into her room, I'd already forgotten about the struggle I'd had to find a spot, forgetting with it the journey I'd have to get back when I left. I worked through the day like normal, and then ate my 4th Subway sandwich of the week while she ate her grilled chicken and rice for dinner. With not much else to do, she had been watching TV for most of the afternoon. She'd watched a few episodes of Haunted Hospitals. Literally, why would you watch that under those conditions? On the Discovery Channel. After that, she watched an episode of some show that talked about the mysterious skunk ape or swamp squash or whatever, which I guess is a thing of legend in the South. But I grew up in Northwest Florida and had never heard of it until then. While we ate dinner, she started watching an episode about shapeshifters. But the clips of evidence freaked her out a little too much, particularly the part where the shape-shifting energy just walked through a 6-foot-high closed gate. Like, literally passed through it. So she switched over to something else. I hadn't paid much attention to the show, but the fact that it freaked her out was funny to me, so I made sure to tease her about it before I left. Her window looked directly out onto the roof of an extension off the floor below. So while I was packing up, I jokingly asked her if she wanted me to close the window blind so that if someone climbed onto the roof, they couldn't see her. But it's a shapeshifter. It won't matter. They can just phase right through it and get ya, I teased. She laughed and told me to stop, not wanting to think about that being even a remote possibility. I kept teasing all the way up until I left. When I got off the elevator on the first floor, I realized it was already dark outside, and I remembered where I had parked. I decided it was probably safer, and warmer, to walk through the hall that connected the 2 towers and exit at the far side. That way, the only distance I had to walk outside was from the East Tower's lobby to the pond, and I could take the footbridge across it instead of walking around like I had that morning. The offices of the East Tower were already closed, as was the gift shop and pharmacy and the cafe, but it was still well lit enough for me to walk through it. When I got outside, I was surprised by how dark it actually was. I guess since no one needs to park on that side after the normal hours of that side of the hospital, there wasn't a need for significant lighting around the pond or parking lot. I took a deep breath, slung my laptop bag over my shoulder, and tucked my keys in my hand, Wolverine style, just in case. As I began crossing the bridge, and I could spot my lone white SUV in the distance, I began to relax a little, realizing the distance of the footbridge across the pond was shorter than my earlier journey around it. But my shoulders quickly tensed again when I noticed a figure near the end of the bridge. Even from where I stood, I could tell the figure was tall, much taller than me. Judging by how much taller it was than the footbridge railing, the top of the railing was a few inches above my waist. And if the figure was human, they were easily a foot or two taller than me. It looked wider too, and sort of frumpy. Like I could possibly make out the shape of his head, but his posture and the proportions beneath it didn't look normal. I stood, for a moment, at the midpoint of the bridge. I weighed my options and the possible outcomes. I figured that maybe the figure was a homeless person, and the odd proportions were just the layers of clothing and possibly a backpack. The thought was reasonable, given the homeless population in our area. When I realized that was what the figure most likely was, I relaxed a bit. Sure, as a mid-20s female, I should absolutely not walk past a large, possibly foreboding figure at night on a footbridge on a pond in a nearly empty parking lot. I know that, but my self-preservation does not outweigh my efficiency. And the thought of having to walk back across the bridge and around the pond, instead of just finishing the distance, was just not practical. Plus, I was cold, and I wanted to get home. So I continued. I gripped my keys tighter in my swinging hand, and held the strap of my bag secured in my chest as I moved closer to the end of the footbridge. The closer I got to the figure, the less clear its features became. I squinted in the dark, trying to identify shapes and figure out what in the hell this person, if it was a person, looked like. Finally, when I was just a yard or so away from it, the figure took shape, and I finally realized what it was. It was a statue. A fucking statue. I laughed, relaxed my shoulders and hands. I stepped up to the rusty bronze statue, admiring the sentiment of it. A father with a child on his shoulders looking down at the ducks and fish. The odd proportions made sense now. It wasn't layers of clothing on a 7-foot hunchback. I laughed again at my own perceptions as I walked past it and to my car, thinking of how easily my mom got freaked out over the shapeshifter. But here I was, getting freaked out by a damn statue. My mom is fine now. They released her from the hospital this morning, and she's home now taking it easy and finishing up the last rounds of antibiotics. I haven't told her about the statue on the bridge, and I don't plan on it. She'd wring my neck if she knew I thought a scary man was standing at the end of the bridge and crossed anyway. But I'm not keeping it from her because I know she'll be mad that I did that. I can't tell her, because when I picked her up from the hospital this morning, there was no statue on the bridge. It was summer break, and my best friend Liam invited me and a couple of our other friends to his family's cottage. I've visited their cottage many times in the past, but for my friends, this was going to be a new experience. On Saturday morning, about 2 weeks into the break, my neighbor Ryan came over to my place and his parents were talking with my parents while me and Ryan were loading up my dad's truck with our camping supplies. In total, there were 5 of us going to the cottage: Ryan, Leah, Liam, Julie, and of course me. Leah was Liam's girlfriend, so she was already at the cottage with him and Liam's family. My dad drove Ryan and I there, and Julie got a ride from her older sister. When we arrived at the small cottage, my dad parked off to the side of the dirt path near the cottage, and we all got out of the truck and walked up to the old steps. Ryan knocked on the door, and when the door opened, we were all greeted by Liam's dad. He was one of those dads that always had a friendly demeanor and was very chatty and energetic, complete opposite of my dad. which was why I loved going over to visit Liam. Liam's father has always had this warm, upbeat energy that was contagious. Whenever you were around Liam or his family, you couldn't help but have a good time. When we got inside, we saw that everyone was there already. Liam and Leah were together on the sofa, and Liam's dad sat beside Liam after walking us in. Julie was talking with Liam's mom about a case they had read in the newspaper recently. Liam's mom was a police officer, and Julie always had an interest in detective work and journalism. After a while of sitting down and chatting, the parents decided that it was time for them to go. Liam's parents and my dad told us to be safe, and Liam's mom kept making it a serious point that none of us were to consume any alcohol. I remember Liam kept making jokes about this and mocking her while pretending to be drunk after sipping his water, and she had a stern look on her face. Eventually, she laughed and just shook her head and left along with the other parents. As soon as they all drove off, Ryan reached into his backpack and pulled out 2 bottles of vodka that were tied together with a blue shoelace from one of his old pairs of shoes. He told us he snuck it into his bag from his cabinet at home. He said that he tied it with the shoelace so that they wouldn't rumble around in his backpack during the ride over. I've been drunk a few times before, but it was not something I looked forward to doing here, especially with Julie around. This was because the last time I drank with a few family members, I got too drunk and made a huge fool out of myself. I had a huge crush on Julie, but this was something I kept to myself. The only person who knew that I liked her was Liam. Julie only tagged along to the cottage because she was Leah's friend. We basically ended up just bullshitting the afternoon away, talking about things from school and telling random stories. Eventually, it started to get dark, so we went outside of the cottage and got a fire going and all sat around it. We were roasting marshmallows and, again, just laughing and talking. After about 10 minutes around the fire, Ryan went inside and brought one of his bottles of vodka. He gave us each a shot glass and started filling them up. "Don't give me too much. I don't feel too well," said Julie. "I'll only put a small amount and I won't refill it. Just have a little bit," said Ryan. Even though I really didn't want to drink any alcohol, I let Ryan fill up my shot glass because I didn't want to look like a square in front of the rest of them, particularly Julie. We all took our shots at the same time, and we all made faces of disgust. I hated the way liquor tasted. The feeling of it running down your throat and the burning sensation it created always made me want to throw it up instantly. But I held it down while trying to keep the straightest face possible. Liam was the only one who was acting as if he loved the stuff. He let out a loud "woo" when he drank his shot and motioned for Ryan to bring the bottle over and give him a refill. I've known Liam well, and being his best friend, I knew he was acting this way just to impress Leah. For as long as I've known him, which was since the 1st grade, he's always been the type of guy to act macho, but I never judged him for it. He was a great person, and when I first moved out to our area, he was the one who came up to me and asked me to be his friend. I loved spending time with him and his family, so I was always grateful for Liam growing up. While we were around the fire, Liam talked about how there were expensive items buried in the woods left by people decades ago. He said his dad had told him this story a while back and vowed to go looking for these items the next time he went camping. Liam was describing his dad's face when he told him this, and he said his dad was shocked. He was saying how upon mentioning looking for the items, his dad's face became pale, but eventually he laughed it off and just said, "Kid, stay away from the deep part of the woods." Ryan suggested that we all bring flashlights and go look for the items in the woods. I got pissed off when he mentioned this because I knew that he was going to say that sooner or later upon hearing the story Liam told. A story which I knew was clearly bullshit. Liam must have told it because he was bored and wanted a little adventure, but he knew that if he told a story like that, Ryan would fall for the bait. I'm not really up to it. Besides, I like being around the fire, Julie said. "It'll be a quick walk. Plus, we'll be in a group. Not like anything could attack us," Liam said in response. Julie sighed but didn't argue much. Leah started saying to Julie it would be good if people were out lurking in the woods because then she could find her a boyfriend. This made Julie laugh, and she eventually ended up softening to the whole exploring the woods for secret items idea. Internally, I was really upset. In all honesty, I wanted to just hang around the fire and try to get to know Julie better. But now, I had no other option. We all ended up getting up and going back inside the cottage for a bit so we could use the bathroom because we all knew that we weren't sure how long we were exactly going to wander around the woods. We gathered things that deemed would assist us in searching for the items out in the woods. This list of things was small and boiled down to essentially just a baseball bat and, of course, flashlights. Liam brought the baseball bat from the bedrooms in the cottage. He put it under one of the beds 2 years ago. I remembered the bat because I was over at the cottage that year with my parents and his family. Liam was showing the bat off to his dad, saying, "If anyone ever tries to break into here, I'll beat the shit out of them with this." I distinctly remember Liam's dad laughing hysterically at it, responding with, "Son, I promise you, if anything around these woods breaks into this cottage, a bat wouldn't be strong enough a form of defense." Liam's mom didn't find what Liam was saying funny. She kept a straight face. She never liked when he used bad language when she was around. "You think that shit is going to do any damage if there's a bear out here?" I said to Liam. Everyone laughed, and I couldn't help but crack a smile too when I noticed that Julie was laughing. It put me at ease seeing everyone in a good mood. Even Liam was laughing and responded, "If it's a bear, I'll just throw you at it as a sacrifice, Trev." We all walked out the door, and Liam closed it behind us and locked it. He told Ryan to turn on his flashlight and follow him. He told us all to stay close because there were only 2 flashlights in total. Liam led the way, and we followed behind him, cuddled close together. Julie started to rub her shoulders and said that she was cold. And then she grabbed my arm and started walking close to me. I asked her if she wanted to wear my sweater, but she said she would be fine, and we kept walking. For some reason, part of me felt that she wasn't really cold at all. Not sure why I thought that. At the beginning, it wasn't that bad. We were all in an upbeat mood, sharing stories and laughing as we walked through the woods. If we looked back, we could still see the faint outline of the cottage, and that made us feel safe. From time to time, Ryan and Liam shone their flashlights at the ground and would occasionally stop to examine the ground. But for the most part, we all knew that we were here just to pass time, rather than search for expensive artifacts. After a while, conversations dried up, and we were just walking in silence. I really wanted someone to say something to spark the conversation up again, but no one seemed to want to speak, so I kept quiet as well. I took a quick glance over my shoulder and felt a chill because I could no longer see the cottage behind me. It felt eerie walking around in complete silence, and paired with the fact that the cottage was out of sight, it made that feeling much worse. "Think we should head back now?" Leah said. I was grateful she said something. I definitely didn't want to bring up the idea that we should turn around, especially not with Julie around. Julie was still holding onto my arm, and I noticed that the deeper we got into the woods, the tighter the grip was. Clearly, I wasn't the only one who was spooked. "Just a little while longer," said Liam. "I'll probably never come out this deep into the woods again, so I really want to see if I can find something out here tonight." No one spoke for a while after that, until Ryan broke the silence. "What the fuck is that?" he exclaimed. "What, man?" Liam said in response. When we all took a glance over at Ryan, he looked haunted. He was breathing heavily, and the beam that was coming from his flashlight was shaking rapidly because his hands were shaking so much. This removed any doubt that he was playing a joke on us. "By that log over there, there was someone wearing a mask," he said. Liam shone his flashlight over to that area that Ryan was pointing at because Ryan's beam was so unsteady. We didn't see anything, but we did hear noises from behind the log. A slight scratching sound could be heard coming from the wood. We were all scared shitless, but Liam mustered up the courage to walk up to the log. While he was walking over to it, he stumbled over some branches and dropped his flashlight. He was feeling around for it, but had trouble locating where he had dropped it. He asked Ryan to shine his light by him. As Ryan was raising his flashlight, he let out a loud shriek and his flashlight fell to the ground. The area around us was pitch black as both flashlights were off. Ryan kept repeating over and over that something smacked the flashlight out of his hand. He was hysterical at this point. While we were trying to calm him down, we heard something near us. It was letting out heavy and deep breaths. We all stood completely frozen and quiet. The thing near us let out this muffled, gurgling sound. It sounded much like a bear, but almost as if a human was trying to mimic this sound. Liam told us not to move. He said it was most likely a bear that was circling around our group. We heard footsteps walking slowly around us. None of us moved an inch. After a few seconds, Leah started to scream. "My arm! Help me! The son of a bitch is fucking grabbing me!" She kept screaming over and over, and we heard grunting of what sounded like a man near Leah. Liam rushed over to where he heard Leah screaming, and once he got a hold of her, he yelled out that we all needed to run. We all started running through the woods, and thankfully the path in front of us was lit because Ryan retrieved his flashlight off the ground when Leah was being grabbed by whatever the hell that thing was. Adrenaline was flowing through me as I ran through the woods. I was desperately hoping that I would not trip and fall over. In my mind, I had the dark feeling that whatever it was that grabbed Leah was trailing us. While we were all running, I noticed that Julie was still holding onto my arm. I started to tell her that she shouldn't do that because it could mess with our balance as we were running. "Julie, you should let go of my arm. Julie. Hey, Julie." "Julie is at the front with Leah, man," Ryan responded. When Ryan said this to me, my heart dropped. I quickly clawed at the hand grabbing onto my arm and tried to pry it off of me. It had a firm grip and I felt hot breath near my left ear. I let out a small yelp and kept swiping at the area near my ear, and while doing so, my hand hit some type of plastic material. "What happened?" Liam shouted out from in front of me. I told him that I think I felt something, but it was probably nothing. I yelled out that we all needed to keep on running. Eventually, we could see the lights that were on the sides of the cottage, and we all felt relieved. We got up to the door, and Liam yanked it open and held it open for us as we all ran inside. As soon as he saw that we were all in, he came inside as well and shut the door behind him. He fastened the lock from the inside and ran around every room of the house, making sure that it was locked securely. We were all panting, and Julie and Leah were holding each other while crying. Liam came over to Leah and started to hold her. Julie locked eyes with me, so I went over to her and held her closely. She was crying softly on my shoulder and saying that she wanted to go home. I was about to tell Liam that we should call his parents, but right before I could get the words out, Ryan spoke. "Where the hell is my other bottle of vodka? I left it right here on this table, Liam." "It has to be there somewhere. Check your backpack or something. You sure you didn't bring both bottles outside by the fire? We might have drunk more than you think," Liam responded. I wanted to help Ryan search for his other bottle of vodka, but I didn't want to leave Julie alone. She was weeping, and it almost felt as if she was trying to whisper something to me. I figured she was probably just talking to herself because she was so scared. We sat in silence for a while, then decided that it would be best for us to go to sleep. We didn't want to call any of our parents to come and pick us up because we were afraid that they might have known that we were drinking. We decided to spread blankets out onto the floor and set pillows down and sleep right in the main room of the cottage rather than in separate bedrooms. Nobody said a word, and it took us a while, but we all ended up eventually falling asleep. The rest of the summer was pretty boring. We were all keeping in touch via social media, and we had our own little group chat going. The conversations we had never mentioned that night at the cottage. Everyone seemed to act as if that whole night had never happened, which was probably for the best. Having Julie in the group chat made me get over that night pretty easily. Around a week before school started, my dad came up to me and asked if I had seen Julie anywhere. I told him that I hadn't, and asked him why he was asking me that. He told me that Julie's parents called him and said Julie went out a few days ago, and had not returned home yet. I told him I haven't seen her since the night we went to the cottage, but I let him know that I would message some friends to see if they knew where she might be. I went into the group chat on my phone, and Leah, Ryan, and Liam all said that their parents got calls from Julie's parents as well. The police eventually got involved and they organized a search team. Julie's parents were frantic and were telling the cops to search every inch of the town and surrounding areas. While I was sitting next door on Ryan's porch with him one day, Liam and Leah came up to us and sat down as well. Liam suggested that we should go out and try to look for Julie. We thought it would be a good idea. As we all stood up and started walking down Ryan's driveway, all of our phones got notifications at seemingly the same time. We all looked at each other and pulled out our phones. It was a message in our group chat. My heart started beating wildly as I opened up the chat. I looked down at my phone and saw that we had all gotten a message in our group chat from Julie. It was a picture of her with her back facing the camera sitting next to a log. On top of the log was a bottle of vodka with a blue shoelace wrapped around it. It would be awesome, Pierce had promised me. Trust me, he had assured. Those famous last words rang in my ears as we bolted through the creaky corridors, the old man's hollers echoing throughout the house. The boisterous voice belonged to Mr. Charles, the owner of the prestigious abode, and he certainly did not sound delighted to find two unwanted kids running rampant in his home. This is all your fault, by the way, I snapped in between breaths, sweat dripping down both of our soggy, loose shirts. Pierce eyed me "we'll settle this later" look and turned the next corner. Our heavy breathing bounced off the walls once we came to a stop seconds later. We frantically looked around, trying to locate the exit route. Where's the vent system we used to get in? I asked. Pierce felt the walls quickly until his fingers settled upon a rectangular outline, which was barely visible. Damn it, he muttered. Old man must have blocked it off. What do you mean blocked it off? I don't know. The vent we crawled through is sealed right here. I think it's a system he can close manually. I rubbed my temples. Okay, think. We'll have to find another... I stopped dead as a deafening shot resounded through the air, and I heard the faint, almost unperceivable click of someone reloading far above us. What in the actual hell was that? Pierce questioned. Was that a shotgun? I don't know, Pierce. Do you want to go find out? My annoyed comment ushered us forward. We reached the end of the hallway before Mr. Charles's voice bellowed from the ceiling above, sounding even closer. Stop running! The metal clack of his shoes traveled swiftly above our heads as my pounding heart struggled to stay inside my chest. We then sprinted past more hallways until we arrived near a winding, stone brick staircase that tunneled into a lower level. Seeing no other alternatives, we ran down the narrow spiral. The light slowly died behind us as we descended into the darkness. At the bottom stood a single metal door with a brass sliding door latch. I anxiously kept watch behind us while Pierce wriggled the tiny handle out of its socket. Moments later, we crept into the unusual space that, once my eyes adjusted, resembled more of a dungeon cell than an actual room. Two windows were etched into the lengthier walls of the rectangular space, shielded by vertical, prison-like steel bars. The dying sunlight rays from outside radiated through them, barely illuminating the interior. Pierce and I stuck close, edging past the dusty, support pillars that held the room up. At the far end was another door with a tinted glass portion. Before we could reach it, a small voice emanated from the darkness near one of the corners. Help me. The shaky, yet soft voice belonged to a timid girl, crouched on the floor, visibly shaking. Her arms and knees were caked in dirt and she gazed at us with depressed eyes. As she edged near the light, I could notice her scarred, fluffy cheeks masking a pain I could not comprehend. Help me out of here, please. Pierce and I eyed at each other. Did that man trap you here? I asked politely. She nodded. He's horrible, she mumbled. I can't remember how long I had been locked in this wretched cage of his. She then attempted to get to her feet, though her weak legs gave way. Help me get her up, Pierce told me and turned to her. Don't worry, we'll get you out of here. Our eyes remained fixated on her as we approached forward. She held out her arms. A faint smile tugged at her lips. I don't know how long it's been since I've tasted the outside world, she stated. She looked so innocent, so full of warmth and joy, as if the world around her was obligated to apologize for the predicament she was in. I did not notice myself smiling back, eager to see her expression light up. I never wanted the feeling to go away. Pierce and I inched closer by the second, her trance pulled our hands towards their final brink of collision. Suddenly, the door at the end exploded in a wall of debris and glass. The immense force shoved Pierce and me off of our feet, and we both landed face first into the solid floor. Unsteadily, I glimpsed up to see the sight of Mr. Charles standing in the opening, aiming a shotgun at something that made me dry heave in place. Where the girl once stood was, let's just say, not a girl anymore. A spider-like beast stared back at Mr. Charles. Spiny legs protruded from a hairy, vertical abdomen that dripped with a slimy substance. Drool emerged from its center daggers, which were attached to an elliptical, pale face with multiple slit eyes. It stood taller using some of its dark legs, the longest of which acted as arms. The same arms that Pierce and I would have made contact with a moment earlier. Mr. Charles fired multiple shots in quick succession, replenishing the smoking barrel with new rounds like a professional. The dying, ear-piercing shrieks that followed only lasted for so long. Within seconds, the creature melted into the ground below until only the slime substance remained. Mr. Charles slung the gun over his shoulder and moved towards our trembling, heavy-breathing bodies. Kneeling down, he gestured to the corner. "I call that thing a mind-bender," he whispered in an undertone. It adores deceiving its prey before consumption and, eventually, prolonged digestion. He stretched out his free hand towards me and let out a sigh. "All right, get up. You punk kids just ruined my hunting day." I don't remember much of the previous day before going to bed, so must have been a pretty rough day as I remember being really sore. This exhaustion might be why I wasn't really afraid when I woke up in the middle of the night to the prompting of an ominous-looking fellow standing over me. Well, he seemed ominous at first, but had a pleasant face, so maybe he was disarming. "John, wake up, John." "Whoa, who are you?" "Wake up, John. I'm Death." Death? Yeah, Death, or otherwise known as the Grim Reaper, which I have no idea how I got that nickname as all my high marks are in client service. What he told me didn't immediately process, so I paused for a moment. Dead? Wait, dead? How could that be? I'm dead? "Yeah, John, you're dead." "He'll be dead as soon as I can find my 22. Now which pillow did I put it under again?" "You can't hurt death, John, or hide from it. I come for everyone eventually. Come on, man. It happens." "But how can I be dead?" "Your health, John. You didn't take good care of yourself." "Of course I did. I jog nearly every day." "You're too fat for that, John. You can't overwork your body like that. It'll overload your systems." "I also did keto." "What year is it, John?" 2020. In the next few years, it'll be found that excessively eating fat is actually bad for you. In fact, it'll be your autopsy report that adds to the study that finds this. So your life wasn't totally meaningless. But I don't remember feeling ill. Well, maybe a little stress, but... Stress? The man, whom I will refer to as Death from here on out, interrupted. "Well, yeah. My work can sometimes be hectic, but I've learned to manage." "Well, no wonder your immune system gave out." "My immune system?" "Yes, John. Your immune system just gave out on you. Stress does that. Your body was like, what's the point of keeping this guy alive if he doesn't even seem to care himself?" "But I didn't feel sick or anything." "Do you remember that slight itch you had the other day?" "Yeah. What about it?" "You really shouldn't ignore your body's warning signs like that." "But don't you think that's a bit paranoid?" With a slight grin, Death responded, "Well, sure. But look where you are now." "But I've had regular checkups." "And you trust those assholes? Doctors are overworked, John. You're just a number to them." The initial feeling of defeat suddenly turned to dread. I was dead. Or was I? Maybe this was just a dream. Reluctantly, I continued to argue with Death. "Well, if I'm dead, Prove it. Prove what? That you're the Grim Reaper. You don't look like death to me. You look just like some guy. Maybe my mind is just remembering some random face I saw yesterday. Don't go down that route, John. That would be discrimination. Well, fact remains. I'm going to need some hard proof. It was at this point I suddenly regretted what I had asked for. What if he used his celestial entity powers to show me unbearable horrors as his proof? He just seemed to look confused, then suddenly had an idea. How do you feel? Good, actually. Thinking I might have scored a point. Like the weight of the world is now off your shoulders and you can suddenly fly? The best I've felt in years. Well, there you go. What? I had thought this would be proof positive that I was in fact not dead, but he seemed to take this point for himself. There what goes. You're free, John. You're free from your corporeal self. Wouldn't that lack of pain make it more likely that I'm not dead? No. Oh. I felt that at this point, even if I wasn't fully convinced that there would be no arguing with whoever this was, I wasn't wholly unconvinced though. In fact, I was willing to acknowledge it, but I still wasn't wholly ready to accept it. As the old lyric goes, I'm sick of living, but scared of dying. Out of an apparent desperation, which was, I was certain, a state which death had dealt with numerous times, I continued on. Okay, so I'm dead then. So what's next? Intake and processing. So, I'm assuming that there is an afterlife then. Which religion was correct then? Oh, they're still full of shit, John. Wait, you weren't gullible enough to believe any of them, were you? I mean, they all have some elements of truth. Until some influential people realized you could use them to manipulate the masses and started adding their own stuff. So what is real then? That's not my department. And that would be an infringement on your religious freedoms. Oh. I pondered. Well, did I live a good life? We'll take a look at the scoreboard here in a minute. Let me grab it. He then began to scroll through his tablet. There's a scoreboard? Well, yeah. What else would the meaning of life be, if not to compete for an arbitrary goal? I had always assumed life just kind of came into existence through natural means, and we could just determine our own meaning. That's loser talk, John. Anyways, let's take a look. There's some really cool stuff here. He held out his tablet to where we could both see an application with what appeared to be a list of millions of subjects. My eye caught some pretty interesting scoreboards. Best mustache in history, Charlie Chaplin. Best at ruining a trend, Adolf Hitler. Most child support owed, Genghis Khan. Wow, there's a lot of categories to achieving. Almost makes all of our complaints seem insignificant in the grand perspective. I'm used with a humbling, newfound perspective on life. We really should do something about that low self-esteem of yours, John. Anyways, here we are. We browsed some of the things in which I supposedly excelled. I was never number one in any category, but I was still surprised to find that I actually did pretty well in anything at all. I had high markings in being a good brother to my siblings. I actually did better than most in my college days in spite of the fact that I dwelled on my low grades. I was about middle class and in relatively good health in comparison to the whole of humanity both alive today and throughout history. In fact, in my retrospection, I meditated on the fact that I was born with almost perfect timing during a time when diseases were being eradicated, wars were on the decline globally, poverty and hunger, while still a major issue in the developing worlds, were beginning to minimalize. The fact that I was born at this time in this country gave me much to be thankful for. I began to miss my life. I realized that I had abused and squandered the time I had. I wished I could have done it all over again with this newfound appreciation. I wished that, while I was proud of what I had accomplished, I could have pushed harder and made a major difference in the world. Oh, look, interrupted Death with a chuckle. I guess that one coworker did think you were weird. And with that, all of my musings were replaced by my familiar anxiety that haunted me during life. But, continued Death, it looks like it was extremely non-consequential. Death must have taken notice of my apparent disappointment. Don't beat yourself up, said Death. You really didn't miss much. This world only had maybe another half a millennium left as society slowly begins to succumb to extreme confusion, ushered on by the rapid spread of disinformation and deepfakes. Confusion? Yeah, in fact, it's one of the Great Barriers. Great Barriers? I can't remember the actual term for it. It's something else, but it's one of the things that keeps civilization from becoming interstellar spacefaring. You mean the Great Filter? Don't patronize me, but yeah, that's it. Thank you. I think on this planet, this is Earth, right? I think on this planet, people don't know what's real anymore, so they begin to just make up their own shit and accept what they like, and eventually revert back to extreme tribalism controlled by the elites who direct the flow of information and get everyone killed off for profit. Death then looked at his tablet again. Oh shit, he exclaimed. Oh man, you're missing all the good stuff actually. Aliens in the next year, a cure for cancer, your student debt forgiven. Death browsed the tablet further. Ah, you missed immortality. What are the odds? Death looked up at me with a solemn look. It was apparent he was used to committing this faux pas. Well, man, tough break. I guess the optimists are right sometimes. I took a sigh and then felt that I should advocate for myself one last time. So, is there really nothing I can do then? I'm dead. Could there be any mistake, maybe? Listen, man, I've gone through this billions of times with billions of people, over millions of years. Then Death gave a sigh. But, in the interest of being fair, I'll submit an inquiry. Death quickly jotted an email on his tablet. You really never get used to these keyboards. You'd think with the funding we get, they'd buy us all Surfaces. There was an awkward silence after the swishing of the email where Death and I just made eye contact. Shouldn't be too long. They normally get back to me pretty quickly. Okay, I said timidly. So, I continued after a brief pause. What other cool things can you tell me? Do you believe in ghosts? Ghosts are real? I asked with a gasp. No. Oh. Ghost Hunters is still my favorite show, though. It's hilariously stupid. You watch it? I actually don't. Well, I actually didn't watch much television. Oh, said Death. Were you some kind of monk or something? No, I said. I did watch some Netflix shows, but towards the end there, I felt inclined to try my hand at other, more productive. It was at this point I noticed Death look down at his tablet and interrupt me with an exclamation. Ah, yeah, you're not 75, are you? No. Our mistake. You're good. I was scheduled for a guy who had the same name as you. Pretty frequent, as you can imagine. I signed a sigh of relief. So, I'm not dead then? No, it was just a clerical error from one of our office assistants. You're good. Wait, I'm good? I said with anger. You almost took me away from my life when it wasn't my time, after having told me you don't make mistakes. I'm pissed. How many others throughout history were taken before their time? Oh, it was a shit show back then, Death said, nearly unfazed. But hey, it happens. Lucky you caught it, right? I was swimming in a mixture of emotions. It then dawned on me that I was beginning to hear a faint voice. John, are you awake, John? I suddenly found myself waking up in a hospital bed. I looked around to see a nurse and a physician by my bedside. Take it easy, John. You took a pretty heavy hit, said the physician. Hit? I said. Did I fall or something in my sleep? In your sleep? The physician asked oddly. John, you were hit by a car about 45 minutes ago. You only got some minor bruising luckily, but hitting your head on the sidewalk knocked you out. I'll have the neurologist take a look at you before releasing you. An officer then entered the room with a photo. Good to see you're doing well, he said. I'm Officer Arnold's. I was able to get a photo from the nearby CCTV camera. I'd like you to take a look. To my surprise and horror, the man driving the car which sent me flying was none other than the face of Death. I guess sometimes your brain does remember faces. My family moved around a lot when I was little. We usually never stayed in one place for more than a year. Never really understood why until I was older. We never had a lot of money and my dad had a really bad drinking problem, so when we moved into a new place just after my 10th birthday on Hanover Street, that had 3 floors, one being a basement, I was overly excited. I'd never gotten my own room before, and even better, my parents were going to turn the basement into a playroom for me and my sister. Everything was going great, till about a month of living in the new place. I started having trouble sleeping in my room. Whenever I was about to fall asleep, it'd suddenly feel so unbearably hot that my skin would start to prickle, and I'd have to peel my damp sleep shirt away from my back. As soon as I left my room, though, the temperature felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. I was the only one to seem to notice. Anytime I tried to complain to my parents, I was told that it was my imagination. Anytime my parents did decide to humor me, they'd walk in, say it felt fine, and leave. A few weeks after this, I started to feel like something was watching me in the darkness. Every time I turned on my bedside lamp to try and face whatever was watching me, I was completely alone. One night, I had snuck into the basement to play video games when I knew everyone would be asleep upstairs. It was around 3 in the morning when I finally made my way through the dark house, back up to my room. That's when I saw it. Illuminated by my nightlight, there was a shadow that looked like it was being cast by a boy about my age. At first, I thought it was mine, but the shadow was facing my bed and looked too defined to even be called a shadow. The outline was smooth, like I was staring at some weird cutout of a totally blacked out person. A sense of dread filled my body. My legs felt weak and I wanted to run, but I just kept staring. Something in my head told me if I moved, if I got its attention, it would kill me. Mustering up every ounce of courage in my 10-year-old body, I reached for the doorknob and slammed my door shut. Suddenly, my parents' bedroom door whipped open. I nearly peed my pants as I jumped away from the door. I looked up only to see my dad glaring down at me. I tried to explain what I saw, but he mumbled harshly about it being a nightmare and guided me back to my room. I wanted to warn my dad not to open my door, but he shushed me every time I tried to speak. But when he opened the door, there was nothing. He warned me about slamming doors before shutting mine behind him as he left. I pressed my back against the door, staring hard into the dimly lit room, just waiting to be attacked by what I had seen earlier. My legs finally gave out, sending me sliding down to the floor. I sat with my knees tucked to my chest, tears slowly streaming down my cheeks. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes again, the morning sun was shining through my window. I could feel the tear tracks that had dried up to my cheeks as I started to fully wake up. I was suddenly reminded of what happened last night, and I tried to quickly stand, but my body protested. My knees ached, and as soon as I tried to bear weight on them, I fell over. Now with my face smushed into the carpet, I could see directly under my bed. Glowing red eyes staring back at me. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. I startled awake, eyes wide as I stared straight ahead, trying to process what had just happened. Was it all a dream? No. I was still against the door when I had fallen asleep last night. That was the only time I had actually seen the figure. But from then on, I'd dream about the shadowy figure, about glowing red eyes that bore right into my soul. Once school started up a few months later, I begged my sister to sleep in her room since she had bunk beds. My parents weren't too happy about it, but never forced me to sleep in my room. They'd just make comments about it every so often. I didn't care though. The nightmares had stopped almost completely. Eventually my parents dropped it altogether. Maybe they noticed I was myself again, or just stopped caring. Either way, I was just happy to be able to forget about what I saw that night. The only thing that still really bothered me though was my old bedroom. Anytime I was near it, that same feeling of dread swallowed my heart. I kept the door shut as often as I could. Anytime I saw the door open, I'd run past it as fast as my little legs could carry me, taking the stairs 2 at a time, only slowing down when I hit the first floor. Thinking back on it now, maybe I wasn't the only one who was being tormented. Maybe I was so focused on my own plight that I didn't see my parents suffering. I do remember now one occasion when I overheard my mom talking on the phone about a nightmare she had. A nightmare about a figure with glowing red eyes. After a year of living in the house, my parents separated and sold it. I ended up living with my mom a few cities over. I still had nightmares, but they were few and far between. The feeling of dread had finally left, and I was able to sleep relatively peacefully from then on. It wasn't until I turned 19 and got my own place that things started to get bad. I still never saw him again, but I knew he was there, watching me. I started sleeping on my couch in the living room because the feeling became unbearable whenever I entered my bedroom. The nightmares became more frequent until I wasn't sleeping more than a few hours a night. I was exhausted and drained to the point where I was falling asleep at work. I ended up losing my job, but my boyfriend of the time let me move in with him. Just as quickly as it had started, the nightmare stopped again. I still felt uneasy whenever I was alone, but I was able to sleep through the night next to my boyfriend. Eventually, I got another job and things started to feel normal again. I still felt like I was being watched every so often, but that was it, and I decided I could manage. My parents ended up getting back together and moved to the same city as me. At this point, I was willing to believe I'd imagined everything. I was paranoid simply because of chronic bad dreams, and now I'd finally gotten past it. On Thanksgiving one year, me and my now fiance were invited to my parents' place. My mom, of course, decided to bring out an old photo album to show my fiance. I had never brought up my experience beyond the first night because I already knew my parents wouldn't believe me. I had honestly forgotten about him at this point, but the photo stirred up all those old memories. I was almost 30 now, and without the fear of being in trouble, I decided it was worth a shot. I asked my dad as casually as I could about the house, and if he'd ever felt anything strange while living there. He told me they had gotten the place super cheap because the owner's young son had gotten really sick. They had tried everything, but he still passed away from his illness. My dad also mentioned that my room had belonged to the son. Our village's park had been the go-to place for local kids to hang out for decades. It had picnic tables, a fountain, a slide, a seesaw, a pair of swings, and a ton of hiding spots perfect for a good old game of hide and seek. What more could you ask for? A train station had once occupied its place circa the late 19th century, which remained in operation until World War II. After that, the terrain was left abandoned for many years until it became the village's iconic park in the early 1960s. And the rest is history. An afternoon spent in the park after hours of boring teachers and math exercises was an afternoon spent in paradise for my friends and I. Emphasis on afternoon, because every kid in town knew what happened after 8 p.m. Or rather, who appeared every day after sunset. A silhouette that heavily resembled a little boy could be seen sitting on one of the swings. For adults, it was nothing more than an optical illusion caused by the shadows that nearby streetlights casted onto the swings. But if you asked us children, there was clearly something else going on there. Most adults couldn't see anything at all. When it came to teenagers, a bunch of them did manage to make out a blurry humanoid shape, but nothing else beyond that. However, several young boys and girls reported they were able to tell apart details such as the boy's hair and clothes. It was a cold November afternoon. It had been an awesome day. I was having fun at the park with my friends, keeping a beautiful crimson bracelet in my pocket. I planned to give to my crush Anna later that evening, when she would come to my house for dinner along with her parents, who had been friends with my parents since they had been our age. My house's doorbell rang. My mother opened the door and welcomed Anna and her parents in. I sighed as I stared at Anna with my eyes wide open, as if I was caught in a trance. She was beautiful, with long brown hair adorned with a big red bow, with her bangs and the freckles on her cheeks that complemented her precious smile. Not to mention she had an amazing personality. Often helping me with my homework, I just knew we were made to be together. "Fantasizing about your crush, eh?" asked my brother playfully. "What? She's not my crush. This has nothing to do with you," I exclaimed, but my brother rolled his eyes and smirked. "Yeah, right, because you're totally not blushing right now." he sarcastically pointed out. I stopped talking, ashamed I had been exposed. My brother chuckled. Don't worry, I'm going to hang out with my friends tonight. I won't get in your way. Okay, you got me. I'm going to give her this, I said, putting one hand in my pocket. Nothing. The bracelet wasn't there. Something wrong? My brother asked after noticing the panicked look on my face. I nodded nervously. I lost the gift I had bought for her. I must have left it at the park. Dinner isn't ready yet. You might be able to find it if you go there now, my brother suggested. I checked the time. 7:50 p.m. But it's almost 8 p.m., I uttered, thinking about the infamous urban legend. My brother smirked. Aaron, please. I don't blame you. Every kid in town believes in him at some point. But I assure you the Shadow Boy is just an eerie light trick. He's not real. My brother had once believed in the Shadow Boy during his childhood back in the mid-1980s, but he became a boring, skeptical grown-up like the rest when he reached high school. His cell phone suddenly rang. Well, my friends are calling. Good luck with your crush, he said before leaving the house. Anna, her parents, my parents, and I sat down and started eating and chatting. Everyone was having a great time, but I couldn't stop thinking about the lost bracelet. I was seriously starting to consider my brother's advice. I had planned my declaration weeks in advance. I couldn't let it all go to waste. I'm sorry, but I have to go. My teacher just sent me an important email. I can help you if you have homework, Anna said. No thank you. I'm fine on my own. Thanks, I nervously replied. And so, I grabbed a slice of the cake my mother had made for dessert. I put on my coat and rushed to the park. It was quite ironic. A few hours earlier, the park had brought me joy and peace, but now it was a place of darkness and dread. It was quiet, too quiet for comfort. All I could hear was the sound of my own tiptoeing. I couldn't help but feel I wasn't alone. Does that cake taste good? A high-pitched whisper broke the silence, echoing through the night. I froze and frantically looked around for the source of the mysterious voice, but found no one. That is until my eyes were drawn to the swings. There he was, the Shadow Boy. And your coat, is it warm? I heard the voice again, only this time it had a clear origin. The Shadow Boy was talking to me. His whole body was completely black, everything about him. His skin, hair, shirt, shoes. He was as dark as the night sky above us, like a living shadow, to the point he would have been nearly impossible to spot if it weren't for the streetlights that dimly lit the park. I stared at him speechless and frozen in place as he sat on one of the swings, immobile. Who are you? I finally managed to utter after having spent a minute considering multiple possible ways to react to him. It's unpolite to answer questions with more questions. My mom used to say that to me all the time. The Shadow Boy replied. I'm sorry, I answered, desperately trying not to make him mad. I didn't know what he was capable of, and that was terrifying. I could feel the tension was making me sweat. It's okay. You're someone I can talk to, and I like that. Why have you come here, though? It was then when I noticed he was holding something pretty familiar in his right hand. My bracelet. Anna's bracelet. I'm here for that. I'm afraid I need it. Can you please give it back? I asked. But I've just found it today. It's my new toy. I also needed to have fun. I haven't had fun in a while, you know? But you know what would be even more fun? Getting out of this park. But it seems I'm not allowed to do that. At least not without someone taking my place. The Shadow Boy said before looking at me in the face and smiling. I took a few steps back. I did not like where this was going. But you don't understand. It's for the girl I love. Please, you have to give it to me. If you want the bracelet, you can have it. But you'll have to stay here so I can get out of the park. I know. We'll play hide and seek. If you win, you can stay here with the bracelet. If you lose, you'll take my place without the bracelet. Deal? You don't get it. The bracelet's not for me. I need to both have the bracelet and leave all at once. The deal is sealed. All right. I'll start counting to 100 while you hide. 1, 2... The Shadow Boy started counting. It seemed he couldn't care less whether I wanted to play or not. I started running as soon as he closed his eyes. Not running to find a hiding spot, but running to get out of there and save my life. It sucked that I couldn't get back Anna's bracelet, but I was smarter than that. I wasn't going to gamble away my life in a game of hide and seek with a ghost. Where are you going? You have to hide inside the park. Have the planes come back? The shadow boy said right when I was about to reach the park's exit. I looked to my right and nearly had a heart attack when I saw the boy had left the swing and somehow teleported right next to me. I stopped running, fearing he would retaliate in some way if I kept going. Only inside the park, understood? Please, forgive me. Also, what planes are you talking about? You see, back when there were trains here, I came to say goodbye to my daddy. He's a soldier who had to go to stop some bad guys, you know? After he left, I heard some weird noises coming from the sky, and everyone started screaming and running away, and a loud siren started playing. It turned out a bunch of planes were flying towards the train station. The shadow boy's son. And you didn't run away like everyone else? Why would I? I love planes. Plus, they made me laugh. Those pilots must have been pretty bad because they dropped their cargo. I didn't manage to see what they dropped clearly, but I remember it was very big and heavy and loud. Then everything went boom, for some reason. The next thing I remember is waking up here, all alone. The shadow boy replied. Anyway, where were we? He added. Oh yeah, I have to count to 100 again, and you have to hide only inside the park, okay? He turned to the swings and started counting all over again. I sighed in reluctance. The shadow boy had warned me. I had no choice but to oblige and play his game by his rules. I looked around for hiding spots. It's not that there weren't any hiding spots. I knew the park like the back of my hand. My friends and I had been playing hide and seek there for years. But the shadow boy was a spirit who had been there for decades. He probably already knew all of the hiding spots I knew. How do you hide from someone like him? I had to fool him somehow. I took out my coat and placed it behind a tree. I then ran to the opposite side of the park and hid inside a huge bush. I felt pretty cold without the coat, but it was a price I was willing to pay. I curled up into a ball and hoped for the best. The shadow boy stood up and began his hunt. I could hear him as he slowly but surely roamed the park with his eyes wide open with a playful smile plastered on his face. He even started humming at one point. The tension and dread I was feeling hidden inside the bush, desperately trying not to move a muscle as I heard him get closer and closer, cannot be put into words. The fact that it was a life or death scenario for me while he treated it like a fun game made that whole situation even scarier. "Can't hide from me," he yelled. I heard him stop dead in his tracks when he was at the center of the park. He let out a childish chuckle and started running. My heart was racing. Had he found me? I peeked out from inside the bush, expecting to see him rushing towards me. But instead, he was actually running towards the opposite side of the park, towards my coat. I couldn't believe it. My decoy had worked. I could see the exit from inside the bush. I was relatively close to it, whereas the shadow boy was at the other end of the park. Maybe if I rushed to the exit now that he was distracted, perhaps I could make it. It was very risky. I still remembered he could teleport, but if I managed to get to the exit in time without him noticing, the thought of that was just too tempting. I peeked from inside my hiding spot one last time to make sure he was still far away. The coast was clear. It was now or never. I hopped out of the bush and immediately sprinted towards the exit at full speed without looking back. "Hey, there you are. Come back here, cheater." I heard the shadow boy shouting in the distance. I was just mere inches away from the exit. I ignored his words and kept going. I finally managed to get out of the park, but I still continued running until it was no longer in my range of vision, just to make sure. I let out a sigh of relief when I arrived home. "I think you owe us all an explanation, mister," my parents said with frowns on their faces when they greeted me. I could explain, but you wouldn't understand. I said, exhausted and panting. "Aaron, of course we understand. We also had an adorable love story of our own back in the day. So, did you manage to find the bracelet?" My parents replied, smiling. I raised my eyebrows in confusion. How did they know about that? "I'm sorry, bro. Everyone got very worried once they found out you had left the house. I got worried too when I came back and you still hadn't returned. I just had to tell them, my brother said, breaking into the conversation. Where's Anna? I asked. That's what we were all about to tell you. She just left 5 minutes ago once she learned about the whole bracelet thing. She said she was going to the park to give you a pleasant surprise. My skin went pale when I heard that. I was indeed surprised, but the surprise was as far from pleasant as it could be. I rushed back to the park without a second thought. I ran even faster once my paranoid, nervous, and terrified mind started conjuring a plethora of horrible thoughts and scenarios involving Anna and the Shadow Boy. I was beyond exhausted, but I had to keep going. For Anna. I finally arrived at the park after sprinting across the village like a maniac. Anna! Anna! I cried to the top of my lungs. I fell to my knees. What I saw left me in tears. If you visit my village today, you'll find that kids these days no longer speak of a shadow boy haunting the park, but of a shadow girl. The children that live near the park claim they can sometimes hear her crying and weeping. There are some that even say they've heard her faintly uttering a certain name, even though no one knows for sure who she is calling or why. But her appearance seems to be something practically everyone agrees on. A young girl with long hair and bangs, wearing a big bow on her head, and a bracelet on her wrist.